What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Christian, Hanna, here today. And today, guys, I want to do this video. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but for some reason I keep getting nervous about it because it may not reach anybody, and if it doesn't, that's fine. But I want to have this out there because I get questions fairly often. I wouldn't say every day, but fairly often. Hey, how long have you been collecting? Oh, how did you make that horror room? What was your plan? That horror room's cool, which I am proud of my horror room, you know. I don't know if you call me a veteran horror collector. I've been collecting horror stuff for about 11 years. So take that what as it will. I'm not saying I'm a veteran. I've been collecting horror stuff for 11 years. And I want to just talk about how I did this. The people that ask me, how do I create like a horror room? What should I do? And I'm going to attempt to basically tell my story, and hopefully you can take away something from this on how maybe if there's people out there that want to make a horror room, use the mistakes that I've done to help you. So there's a couple things you got to ask yourself when you decide, you know, you want to make a room dedicated to horror. One of the most important things is space, you know, obviously, and your personal taste on, I guess, the look and the style and the busyness, as it were. And I'll talk about, you know, the busyness in here. You know, the first thing I can say was my horror room, the stuff that you see in this room has gone through many iterations just in this room alone. When I first started collecting horror stuff, I was still living at my parents' house, obviously, and it started with just a couple things. I think the very first thing horror-related I ever got was a Child's Play 3 poster, a 24 by 36 poster that I just put on the wall, and I had movies. I had a DVD shelf that I still have till this day that now serves as just the horror DVDs. And it just started with a poster, and my room was scattered with all kinds of different things. I had Rambo stuff, and then I had that, and then that. Horror naturally started to grow into my life, and I would just start collecting horror. Well, naturally, you know, in the infancy stages of it, it's natural to just want to buy just as many cool things as you want in building your horror room. And there's the funness to that and the, you know, the natural progression of that. But then, you know, 10 years later, I find myself, you know, having to closet stuff to bring something else in because of, you know, 10 years worth of collecting, you're going to get a lot of stuff. You know, but when it comes to making a horror room, you know, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. Like I said, number one is space. And number two is you've got to match your personality and your sense of style. I play in bands, okay? So I'm at bars a lot. I play in bands all the time. I have a band now called Cold Canyons. You can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff. Cold Canyons, if you guys want to hear that. And I'm a big fan of the bar nightlife and being the vibe of bars, and I'm a big punk rocker. I'm a punk rocker at heart. It's who I am. My personality is punk rock. My mindset is punk rock. Doing your thing, forgetting what's popular. That's the way I live. And I think my horror room kind of reflects that, in my opinion. You know, I like my horror room to look busy, but also digestible. I like things to be thematic and to kind of tell a story. I think if you walk in this horror room, you can clearly see what I'm a bigger fan of because that takes up the majority of the room in certain sections. You know, if I could start over again with a horror room, this is what I would say to my younger self. I know you love horror, and I know you want to make your room. Don't just buy anything that resembles any sort of movie or horror, period, because you're eventually going to start to really fall in love with certain things, and you're going to want to showcase that more in your room. And a lot of stuff will have to just take a back seat, and you'll either have to shove it in a closet and never see it again, or you'll, you know, spend money on stuff that is fun at the time, but then when you really think about what you could have done in that room, it's too late, or you have to wait, or you just end up spending more money because you've purchased all these cool things, but they take up all this room, and now it's like, oh my goodness. And I'll give you guys tips on posters and stuff in your horror room in a minute. So what I'm getting at is, you know, when it comes to me, there are a few things I absolutely adore. It's Nightmare on Elm Street, Return of the Living Dead, Friday the 13th, and of course, you know, like Halloween. So if you guys seen my horror room a lot, you'll see that on the main wall where the TV is, I made a floating shelf, which floating shelves are very important, especially for hanging masks. Go to Lowe's, get yourself a nice board and the L brackets, and maximizing wall space is important if you're going to want to make a room that's just a hardcore dedicated horror, just madness, room. And especially more on a budget, because if you can't afford to just buy a lot of nice furniture pieces and glass cases, I'm a big fan of the floating shelf. As you can see, I use a lot of those because they do look nice, and they keep the floor area and the majorities of the walls kind of empty, and you can kind of make room for more things you need. And I think doing the themes things is fun because, like I said, if you walk into my horror room, you can clearly see I'm a big Friday the 13th fan. And if you look over there, which you can't see in the video, but I am a Return of the Living Dead nut. It is my favorite horror movie on the planet. So I made this whole wall dedicated to Return of the Living Dead. Because look, of course you like so many horror movies, but you can't just make the wall show that. You know what I mean? You can't just make everything you love show that and the room not just be a complete and utter chaos, And of course, these are things that are all just my opinion and the mindset that I've had from doing this. You also have to decide what your style is in like I said, in the way you dress a room. Some people may not like a busy, cluttered room. So if you're more somebody that likes things to be spacious and kind of clear at the same time, that may be a direction you can go into. If you want to make it more of a theater style horror room, maybe you don't want to have, a bunch of floating shelves. Maybe you don't want to have a lot of busts or masks, because that's something you have to be into as well. It's a shame, us horror fans, we just get hooked on so many things. We get hooked on figures, we get hooked on masks, we get hooked on posters, we get hooked on life sizes, we get hooked on all kinds of stuff. And it's hard. It's hard to balance everything and fit it all in here. This room is not huge. This room is maybe, I'd say 12 by 12 or 12 by 13 with a little bit of extra room in the back right there. But I'm proud of my horror room. This has been 11 years in the process, and this horror room has been in 4 different rooms. So this room has traveled, and your taste will change, and you're going to have to accept the fact that, if you're going to build a horror room down the road, you're going to end up putting a lot of stuff in the closet. So if I could go back and talk to myself, I would say, don't just buy every single thing because it's horror and you want to fill up your room. Take your time. Figure out, as a horror fan, what you love, because it's almost like some things are like when you pay pretty pennies for certain things, like that Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 standee. First off, that's, not one of a kind, but you can't just get those anywhere. So I knew when I made that purchase, it's like getting a tattoo. It's not coming off. It's no different. It's no different from the tattoos I have on my arm. It's a tattoo because it's such a commitment to get something like that and to have it in here. And I have 2 of them. I have a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 one right there. But I'm such a devotee to Nightmare on Elm Street, I knew that they would become mainstays in the horror room. So it's taking your time, and feeling yourself out, because your taste might change over the years, and that's going to happen. Of course, you're going to change your horror room. That's another thing. Don't always just be so dead set on your look and what you have in here as well, because you're going to change and things are going to move around, clearly. If you go to my horror room tours I've done over the last 2 years, every time you watch it, it changes. And partially that's because you're in here so much that you get sick of the way things are and you want to change things. And other times it's just, you have to move things around to accommodate for pieces like that, but it's fun. I'm not trying to make this sound stressful or anything, but having a horror room is so fun. I love coming into this room because all my problems go away. I feel like I'm in the bar nightlife in a sense because everything's just busy and the walls tell a story. Almost like when you go to a venue and you see all the pictures of all the bands that have come through and stuff. That's the way I feel in here, and I love it. And it's somewhat of a time capsule, but it also represents what I love, and I think that's important. I think that's important for your horror room to express who you are, not horror in general. You as a horror fan, I think it's important to express that because then you're proud of it. You know, you're proud to walk in here and say, you know what, yeah, I love Return of the Living Dead, and you know what, yeah, I love Friday the 13th, and you know, I love A Nightmare on Elm Street, and you know, you're proud of that. You're proud of that, and when you build it, I am most proud of the room now because it's, like I said, it's been 10 years in the works, but I think my horror room now really expresses who I truly am. You can probably get a good sense just from this image of what I'm into, especially if you're not a sub to my channel. I think you can figure out, okay, he likes, you know, certain things clearly. And one of the biggest tips I have, especially from people that ask me about horror posters, because if you notice, I'm always changing horror posters, but I'm not spending any money. All I do, if you can get certain posters that are really meaningful to you, like behind me, there's a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 poster. That's an original, and I love that poster. And that's staying. That was a commitment purchase. It wasn't expensive because, you know, posters like that, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 isn't exactly like getting a one sheet of the first movie, but I love Part 5, and I love that poster, so I really wanted it. So I knew when I got it, I was going to have a certain spot where it hangs and it was going to stay there. But a lot of posters, you know, I would go through a lot of different iterations with the Friday posters. I just get cheap prints off Amazon for 15, 16 bucks. So that way when I want to swap it out, I'm not breaking the bank. And I just open the poster frame and put the new poster in front of the other one. That way if I ever change my mind, I can swap them out and have something refreshing again. So that's fun, you know. Just little tips and tricks I've learned along the way. But I wanted to make this video for people who ask me, how do you have a horror room? What did you do? Was this a plan? How did you figure this out? What made you want to do that? Or, you know, can I see that because that inspired me or something, which is great. But I wanted to make this video to just tell my story about how I came up with how I made my horror room and how it represents me as a person. And I think that's the most important thing. Your horror room, if you want to build something like that, needs to represent you and your history as a horror fan. So hopefully you guys took something away from this video. If not, it was kind of fun just to talk about it anyway. But this is Christian Hanna Horror. Please leave your comments below. Tell me your story with your horror room or your plans and how you want to do it. I'd love to know. I love you guys. I'll see you next time. Everybody